December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. The United States was at peace with that nation.
On the Sunday morning of December 7th, 1941, Japanese fighter pilots unexpectedly attacked Pearl Harbor in Oahu, Hawaii, killing 2,403 people and destroying much of the American Pacific Naval Fleet, along with over 100 aircraft. And citizens of America went from shock to disbelief to anger towards their attackers, accusing the Japanese Americans of being spies and saboteurs. The Japanese Americans had already been facing ethnic racism, but the attack on Pearl Harbor only made it worse. On February 19th, 2 months after the Great Tragedy, President Franklin D. Roosevelt issued Executive Order 9066, which would alter the lives of over 110,000 Japanese Americans. They were sent to sorts of concentration camps called internment camps. Many consider this event one of the greatest violations of the constitutional human rights law in history. It caused severe physical and emotional distress among the internees. There were many cases brought up years after the internment of the Japanese Americans, and eventually, in 1988, President Reagan signed the Civil Rights Liberty Act, offering an official apology toward the Japanese Americans. Even before Executive Order 9066 was issued, ideas and suggestions were being given about detaining the Japanese Americans. In fact, there were even some Issei, or Japanese-born immigrants, who were captured before the order was even given. After only 48 hours after Pearl Harbor was bombed, 1,291 of them were rounded up from FBI raids. Even before that, on November 12 of 1941, 15 Japanese-American businessmen and community leaders were taken into captivity. A Central Japanese Association spokesman stated, "We teach the fundamental principles of America and the high ideals of American democracy. We want to live here in peace and harmony. Our people are 100% loyal to America." 2 months later, on February 19th, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, which permitted military personnel to exclude any person who could be a threat to the United States from a designated area. This single order defied many of the rights the Japanese Americans had according to the constitutional amendments. It opposed the Sixth Amendment, which states, "In all criminal, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial." Though the Japanese Americans were being imprisoned, they were not given the right to a trial. This act also disregarded the Fourth Amendment, which proclaims the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched, and the persons or things to be seized. The FBI would often search homes, looking for any items that would signify the family's relativity from Japan, frequently without a warrant or search license. They would also confiscate certain items, such as radios. Yet another amendment Executive Order 9066 broke was the Eighth Amendment, which says, "Excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted." When the Japanese Americans were sent to assembly centers, temporary housing before complete evacuation, they were treated very poorly. The hospitals were understaffed, the food did not nearly meet their nutritional needs, and the medical care lacked. There were even more rights the Japanese Americans did not have, such as not being able to own land, eat in white restaurants, and being denied of their freedom of speech and press. Issei were not even allowed to become citizens. However, their children were automatically granted citizenship because they were born in the United States. Imagine living in a world where you cannot even eat in certain restaurants, walk into certain shops, or other private organizations just because of your ancestry. These are the hardships the Japanese Americans faced during this time. After enduring through mistreatment in the detention centers, the Japanese Americans were sent to internment camps. These, unlike the centers, were made to house the Japanese Americans permanently. The government had built them out in the middle of nowhere, usually in the middle of a dry, barren desert. The living quarters, barracks aligned in rows. There was one family per building. The United States barely accommodated for their needs. There were cots, mattresses, a stove, and a single light in each building. There was no running water and hardly any heating. The latrines and laundry facilities were public. Surrounding the camps were barbed wire and guard towers. However, it was also very much like a small community. There was a form of democratic government, schools, and hospitals. There was also a mess hall where everyone assembled to eat. There were even jobs the Japanese Americans could obtain, but the wages were incredibly low. Teens could earn as much as their parents. Despite the situation they were in, the Japanese Americans made the best out of it. They built gardens, ponds, churches, and many other things. Some raised cattle, pigs, chickens, and planted farms. There were other jobs, too, such as working as a nurse, a firefighter, a police officer, and even working in barber shops and beauty parlors. They had sources of entertainment, too. The camp in Idaho, called Camp Minidoka, had a baseball team that was virtually unbeatable. There were 10 internment camps across the United States, the majority of which being located on or around the West Coast. However, there were some camps that were almost in the Midwest of the United States. The average population of each was 11,258 people, the highest being Tula Lake in California. Other camps included Camp Manasar, which was also in California, Camp Poston and Gila River, both in Arizona, Camp Roher and Jerome in Arkansas, Camp Topaz in Utah, Hart Mountain in Wyoming, and Camp Minidoka, which is in southern Idaho. The first one to be opened was Camp Manasar on March 18, 1942. Within 7.5 months, all 10 of the internment camps were up and running and were in operation for about 4 years. As quickly as they were created, the camps were taken down. Within 7.5 months of the first camps being shut down, all of the camps were closed, the last of them being Tula Lake on March 20th of 1946. Although all of the internees were eventually freed, it didn't happen all at once. On February 8th of 1943, questionnaires determining the loyalty of the internees were given at most of the internment camps to those who were 17 years or older. One of the questions asked if they would give up all loyalty from Japan and pledge their allegiance to the United States. Another asked if they would be willing to serve in the military. Those who answered yes to both of these questions were drafted into the military, most of which becoming a part of the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, made up entirely of Japanese Americans. They were combined with the 100th Infantry Battalion of the Hawaiian Territorial Guard, also a Japanese American group. By the mid-1940s, the government began releasing those who were determined fully loyal. Some of Franklin D. Roosevelt's top advisors strongly suggested a full shutdown of the camps. However, the idea was opposed because it was thought that doing so during election year could be dangerous. In December of 1944, President Roosevelt withdrew Executive Order 9066, and in early January of 1945, Japanese Americans were released. One by one, the internment camps were shut down. In 1948, the government distributed only about $37 million between the 110,000 Japanese Americans for lost or damaged items. Over the next few decades, the Japanese Americans brought many cases into court, and finally, after 40 years of injustice, President Reagan signed the Civil Rights Liberty Act, which presented an official apology towards Japanese Americans.
Yet no payment can make up for those lost years. So what is most important in this bill has less to do with property than with honor. For here we admit a wrong. Here we reaffirm our commitment as a nation to equal justice under the law.